Hell yeah. So I just got off the water today. I drive to Missoula. It's 2 hours away to do some boating. And so one question that I got was like, hey, where's the boat? You know what I mean? Like the boat that I made this winter. And it's still in the garage. It's dry. It's not moldy. We took it one test. But this season on the wave in Missoula, Montana, I've just been learning. I'm always learning new things. Like the second I plateau and stop learning skills on a wave, then maybe I'll kind of switch directions. But I think there's a couple aspects. One in boat design, and so definitely strapping the strap that goes over the thwarts from D-ring to D-ring on both sides of the boat, that really straps, it pulls the top of the boat together, it pulls the outer tubes together, it pushes down on the thwart, and then I have a foam, it's kind of like a U rocker, and that goes lengthwise along the floor, and it's wedged underneath the thwarts. It's actually kind of strapped in so it doesn't go anywhere. But as that whole unit gets compressed together, it pushes out on the floor. Now, I-beam floors don't really bend. It's actually hard to kind of get them to have rocker. I mean, they're pretty rigid. My I-beam floor gets up to 3.5 psi, so it's kind of almost 4 psi, and so it really is difficult to work that. But one of the modifications I made tonight was when the outer tubes were a little bit less inflated, I was able to strap that together even more. And so that was kind of interesting, because if your boat is fully topped off, it's pretty rigid. But towards the end of the night, you know what I mean, maybe my perimeter tubes were maybe 1.5 psi, definitely under 2. I can get them as high as 2.5, but that's kind of where, and my gauge is my gauge. I have no idea if it's going to be, all those gauges can be way off. But anyway, I was able to get the tubes a little bit juicier, and then strapping that together, that really lifted up on the outer tubes, and it really freed up those outer tubes. And especially with a small hole, the outer tubes not hitting is really important. And even my boat, it's unique that the floor is actually really long. I'll actually have to measure it just to see how close it is to, I guess the boats I'm trying to mimic are half slice, just your typical half slice boat. At this point, I don't think I have to reference any kayaks, but I do. I've started to get familiar with the kayaks, mainly through Jackson, but after that I can probably get familiar with the other ones. There's so many kayak manufacturers. All of them are making basically the same thing in different categories. But yeah, so yeah, just a half slice. I could mention the Antics 3. I've never paddled it, I've never seen it, but just from the overview and looking at, anyway, so that's going to be for next winter, is to get the bottom of the boat, especially in that mid beam, to be very much like a kayak. And so let's just get to what the benefits of that are. Kayaks are displacement boats. They're narrow. You know what I mean? They're only 29 inches, 24 to 29 inches wide. They're only 8 feet long, even the half slices, 8.5. So when you sit in them, you physically displace water. But underneath, the Antics 3, you do have a very flat hole underneath your seat. Even a slalom kayak has a very flat hole underneath your seat. So a slalom kayak, a half slice, they're all a mix of planing and displacement holes. You want that pyramid. For a race boat, you want it to look like a cargo ship but just way skinny. You want it to look like a skinny cargo ship. You don't care about your draft because the boat is so rigid and you are so light, it's only going to draft a few inches, let's say. You are displacing that water, but you're doing it with it's like a rocket ship. I mean, literally, you're moving molecules sideways, and that acceleration is what's causing, the force to break through the water. You know what I mean? If you have molecules of water that aren't moving, and now they have to move outward, to here, there's some sort of outward velocity. You have a change in velocity, acceleration. Acceleration has to have a force. That's the force you're overcoming to displace that. And it's just so fascinating that you get into the world of kayaking, you have two things happening like almost simultaneously. Because the second that flat-bottomed hull like hits a wave, now you have water shearing underneath that boat, and now it does become a planing boat. Even in a slalom kayak, you're going to dip your end. And even in an R1 raft, like getting to that 3/4 back on that corner, and my last video on the spud, kind of sitting on the rear of the spud, and trying to paddle it in the harder direction, just like if you're paddling on this side, it's harder to get the boat going that direction. It's easy to spin it that direction, just hard to keep speed. And in that process, you're taking that planing surface, and now you're able to like plane it up and over. And even one stroke with a planing boat, you can physically kind of get it up on top of, just with even one stroke. And then, so the overall design of an R1 boat, I'm going to throw some more juice on the clock, but definitely it needs to cut in. And so we're going to talk about that. The R1 boats are not cutting in, and that's where kind of like a paddle cat potentially gets a little bit more performance, because now you're actually maybe cutting in into that surface. So we're going to be talking about how even a half slice, once it's surfing, the stern is very low volume. It still has the same surface area, but you're able to dip that in just with a slight rock. You're able to, because in an R1 boat, you're like this on the slope of the wave, where a kayak you have a narrow narrow stern, and you're able to kind of flatten that boat. And then the one thing you can do is because it's low volume, tall wise, you're able to slice it back and forth through the pile behind you. And that's just one thing with R1 boats. We're just sticking out in front of that pile, and so we're on a very unstable tipping point. Hopefully we recorded all this. I'm going to throw some more time on the clock. All right, hell yeah. And so the boat, or the black boat that I made, we can take it out next year. It's dry. It's not going anywhere. It's short. You know what I mean? So even just like fitting in a wave is going to do good. It's the underfoot is very flat, like that planing, like we were talking about. It still has the same issue in the stern. It doesn't have. There's a chance that it's more narrow near the stern, but I think I know what I want now. Like, I think I do want like the underfoot of an R1 boat, like where the I-beam floor would be. And it would be ideal if you could sew in, something that was like hard plastic, that was foam. Foam and hard plastic, the harder the surface, the better performance you're going to get. But then lacing things in, even I found with my boat, the fact that you get kind of this motion, sometimes that can actually help, because you can kind of weight the floor and then it pops up, pops down. I've even found in a paddle cat, when you're surfing, just kind of even weighting your cockpit. But anyway, but that I think you want to be fairly narrow and displacing and lower. As low as possible without the boat tipping on too high of angles where it's going to be unmanageable. But if that is a cutting surface, because it's narrow, then when you are surfing, you're going to be able to do this with your stern. Your stern can slice back and forth. The other thing that just in general I have found is that the boat should be fast when you're paddling in that neutral position. Even in my boat, I'm able to get centered and then reach out, but sit totally middle on the thwart, kind of sit up high on that, just the middle of the back thwart, and then paddle the boat. And so yeah, so all of that, I always thought like a wider boat would be better, but now kind of this idea of like an R1 for performance should very much mimic like a canoe with sponsons. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't have, I don't think it has to be too wide at all. And if you shorten it, it can be the same proportion. But I think if you have that like that half slice hole as your floor that's lower, maybe you could have that as your faster running surface. The big question is then what happens on the outer tubes? Like, I think then I've got 2 kayaks, I could cut one in half and then put them on the outside of that, just raised up 6 inches. So I have my, one kayak in the middle. I have found that you do want the normal width. So for a test, I really wouldn't change the width because we are doing such edge. Because when I'm edging my boat, it becomes 2 boats. Like the second I'm on my left edge, the other side is out of the water. My boat already is effectively shorter, and I'm already on this outer tube. And so, like, everything feels good in regards to that. But even on my floor, I think it would be nice if it was, I think, the shape of a kayak underfoot. And I had really good success putting the kayak underneath the RMR Fat Cat. And yeah, it just kind of fell fast. I didn't really practice paddling it from a neutral position. That would be a good test. But hell yeah. So if I do make another boat this winter, it would be centered around the fact that an R1 boat, like the cockpit that I sit in, hell yeah. Having that like half slice underneath as the runner, hell yeah. And then figuring out exactly what you would want for your outer tubes. I mean, you could just use pontoon tubes if I'm making the whole thing out of foam. I really want to shape it. I really want hard chined. Like when I do edge, I want to be, hooking. The other aspect that I have found is that, especially with the boat that I made, and then even my practice this summer, is really using the bow, the diagonal of the bow. Even in my boat, I can't get myself far enough forward. And we have actually done a lot of surf tricks where I actually go to a switch position. So instead of jamming my shins forward onto this front thwart, I actually flip backwards, and then I'm able to weight that corner. Today I tried to jump to that and then weight it and try to paddle in a reversed position. That was funky. I just think like you want to be able to get your weight over that corner. Cool, and we might end it at this because all the water sloshing in the boat is, for me, it's just awful. Especially when I'm trying to make very specific moves. Like the kayakers at the same wave park, they can just kind of cross a current in a displacing way. Because we have captured so much water in the R1 boat, we're like literally going to be taken, we're kind of like a one-to-one mix with the river. And so instead of sheeting over it, and that's not even a planing thing because the kayaks will just cross over a current because their boat is displacing. Their boat is physically sunk in, they're paddling in a line, the water has to do whatever it has to do to get around it, and it will lock that in. Where the R1 boat, and it's not even due to the width of the R1 boat, I think even if it was wide and it didn't take in water, I think it would do a better job of displacing. But But for sure, both things. Edging, displacing, cutting, and then no water. And so for sure I want to work on harder chines over on these edges. So if we do have to cut across, and like that's just a no-brainer. If I'm over onto an edge, I mean it can be like a very hard chine, putting in a square corner, a 45 corner, that's going to be like that race boat. That's going to be like that, like what we talked about, a very displacing, long, object that is just pushing water to the side, and it's going to track real well. And so those are the cool things with an edgeable boat. You can be like, hey, I'm loose, and then when you go onto these edges, especially if they're harder chined, I think we can pick up a lot more speed. And then it's just a matter of like adjusting that so it doesn't get in the way of surfing. And you know what I mean? I have a great litmus test for that at the wave to be like, oh, that's getting in the way. And then it's just a matter of balance. Well, it's getting in the way, but you know what I mean? I'm still using it, for speed and edging. But the rounded outside tubes, yeah, I think just harder chines in general will just open up a lot more options. I'm going to throw some more juice on the clock. I think there's kind of one more thing I wanted to talk about, but we'll see. Hell yeah. Alright, hell yeah. And so, I think I'm sold on the middle portion of the R1 boat being a kayak, and then the outside sponsons, but then, like we said, harder chined, up out of the way, put them onto edge, get all those extra benefits. But when surfing, even in my boat, I guess I finally realized that I'm on that middle I-beam. There's a lot about R1ing that is just instinctual, but then once you jump into the world of kayaking, that's been around for just decade after decade. The technology has, just really fleshed out, all the maneuvers, all the physics of fluid dynamics, have been well crafted, and it's so hell yeah, it'd be cool to get some shout outs from some kayakers to be like, oh yeah, this, and it's just going to be comments from the yeah, no duh, what's the no duh moment? I don't know, but the one, so today at the wave, it was just me and my R1 boat, and then one of the other Missoula locals who's just going to be out there every day. And he's in, let's say he's in a half slice. I can't even recognize the kayaks. But hey, they're fairly long. Like I said, they're displacing, but they still have a planing hole for surfing. And he's sewing up the wave hole that I'm now trying to sew up. So in an R1 boat, hell yeah, I'm actually able to do this and sew that thing up. And that's real cool. And that requires paddling on the offside. It requires edging the boat. It requires trusting that your boat will edge. And that's also our sponson, our outside tubes are super round. Those really don't help you edge. All the function has been from pushing out the floor, and those runners are what's really helping me. But even those are really soft chined, and so those aren't even hard chined. Hell yeah. But I should talk about, because I was able to kind of sew this thing up, I do want to talk about straight surf dynamics, because this should just change day and night. There is no current R1 boat that straight surfs real well. The Colorado boaters, definitely the best has been taking the RMR Thundercloud, sitting in the back of it, and you're able to modulate that, kind of keep it square. And so even today I was kind of working on that, getting as far back as possible, still in this middle compartment. So I still got my feet back here, but then I'm, leaning back as far as possible. And I was able to do this with the stern. And that's huge because when you're prying on one side, if it gets, it's easy to pry it back. So let's say I'm on my offside and I don't even know. Yeah, so if I'm on my strong side, it's easy to pry it back, but the second it goes this way, you're screwed. And so today I was practicing on my offside. And so if I'm over here and I can pry it back this direction, like all day, but that means I have to kind of have it angled that way. And the second it gets this way, then it requires forward paddle strokes. But once that hits, that's just going to rotate out before you can actually do a forward paddle stroke. So this was really cool. I was able to get way back and then get up onto the pile. So I've been really feeling where that pile is, and if I actually get onto it like a pivot point, it's a high spot. That really frees up two things. It frees up the bow, and I can actually edge it the other direction. So if I'm neutral in the boat, way far back and prying, then I can feel where that hole is, or just I can actually rock the boat from that back position. I can edge it like this. And so that was crucial for being over here, losing it like to this way, and having to do forward paddle strokes just by, leaning back over the hole, not having that go that direction and purl, and then have this pivot point where that stroke actually just pivots it around. And most of it was just modulating the stern. And so that's what's probably happening with kayaks, you know what I mean? When they're sewing it up, it's more stern oriented, just hips and stern, making that stern do its thing, like cutting through the wave. And so, yep. So between that stern cutting through the wave, having it more displacing, that should really help straight surfs. And then a boat that just doesn't take in water, that would really help. I think I'm done with this video, but it was just a really cool day because we were really able to work on those stern maneuvers. I can talk about the middle wave and maybe we'll be done. The middle wave has a really, really like steep hole. And the second that you would get like this, well, and then even on the normal wave, what happens is the second your stern goes like this, it's an unstable point. And so that's where if we get more displacement and lower volume in that stern, then we can have that stern cut into the wave and we can flatten out. So even if our hole is steep and the boat wants to do this in an R1, we can get that stern to flatten out into the wave and we can do this. So you're actually like spreading the butter, whatever. But yeah, using the stern to cut through. And these are just so basic that no one's probably talking about, like cutting, just being on a wave and just being able to turn back and forth, and your stern is cutting back and forth through that hole. But now, I mean, it's not a basic move, because the only other kayaker today, that's what he was doing, a small hole, and then just sewing it up. And but even on that small hole, he's real steep on that hole. But in an R1, it's cool, especially if you get rocker, you can get to the back. And then I was kind of in this position, and I was just really working on being centered, doing that, staying on my offside, because we were practicing that, and just making, and what I have been doing is like prying and then jumping to this way to pry, but I was trying to do it all on one side. So that means that I'm prying on one side. I can easily pry the boat back. Sometimes it's hard to figure out. Yeah, I can pry the boat this direction, and if I do a forward paddle, if I'm getting too far this way, then I can actually modulate on the hips and edge that stern in, and then get high up onto that pile, and then that's that pivot point. So we did a lot today. One side, get way back, find that pivot point, able to kind of move our hips, edge the boat from that stern position, and then also, when we had to do that forward stroke, really pivot it back, and that's a real hard maneuver. On the other wave, I'm basically prying, getting the boat to come this way, and then if it does start going this way, then I jump to the other side and then pry it back, and then I'll pry it this way until it goes too far, then I'll jump to the other side. So anyway, So hell yeah. So more displacing, half slice in the middle. That would be kind of what I want to work on for next year's boat. So, and then the only way you're going to get a low volume, but still I want to sit back there, and so it's got to be the runner, especially. So the cockpit can be the. Excuse me. Hopefully we're recording this okay. If you look at open canoes like the freestyle OC1, is like your cockpit. Is my yeah. No, your cockpit in an OC1 is like it's got to fit you. Like you have to actually fit kneeling into this huge cockpit, and water has to be able to come in, and so it's a very square and boxy cockpit. But then your ends are ready for play boating. And so I really think just in general an R1 boat should be shaped that way. The cockpit should be very traditional, like we've kind of figured out how big we want it, where you want to jam your feet. I think I need a little bit less width, you know what I mean? The length is fine, but then outside of sitting on the thwarts, sitting on the perimeter tubes, I actually need all that. I don't need those gaps that I did on the prototype. But then past that, I need the boat, if it's hard shell, I need it to actually go down and reduce in volume. Just like the half slice, it would reduce in volume in the stern. Even the volume of a half slice in the bow is still way less volume than any R1. The R1 nose is just awful because you have two big 45s and then usually something in the middle, and that's just going to catch and turn. And so there's no skipping, you know what I mean? There's no like, hey, look at this R1er just boofed a hole and then just started skipping through like that. So that's what I think that would be very useful. And for starters, you could just have the bow be the same, and then, you know, probably maybe not even too much on the other side. So yeah, but yeah, just a lot to experiment with that. But you still want to be able to actually jump towards the back and sit back there, but still have your stern be low volume. So that's why you have like an elevated place to capture you, and that can just be like fabric or just whatever. And then the actual in the water stern is you know, that's going to be either the foam, hard plastic, or whatever. But those can be totally separate. And I think it really would, you know, I'll have to figure out what shape this is, but definitely it's an alligator's mouth. Here's your low volume stern, and then here's potentially where you want to sit. You don't have to have anything in between because you need this low volume. You need water to fill that vacancy, but you still want to sit on here. Same thing as like a paddle cat, just have fabric over where you maybe want to jump to the back. In my RMR Fat Cat, I really want to actually make that totally solid fabric so you can just jump onto the back without just falling out. So, hell yeah. Alright, so that's the newest, latest from paddling this summer in R1 design, you know what I mean? Taking no water. I think an R1 boat that takes in no water would be vastly superior, and then we can start adding back in where you want the water. But like for my design, I want to, it still needs to shed water, but all that, just like a paddle cat. A paddle cat is basically taking in a no water, that's a no water boat. And it's actually perfect. If your cockpit and the paddle cat takes in water, it's like the perfect amount. So, hell yeah. I'm going to see if we got more juice. Other than that, that might be it. Hell yeah.